you ever thought about how a baby, if you have one, you probably have, or maybe if you've had children, maybe you forgot, I don't know, but a baby, or maybe even into childhood, right? That how they get hungry, and they're really not shy about telling you that they're hungry. I mean, they get hungry, they start to cry, they really just want to eat, and so mom or dad has to pick them up and has to feed those little babies, right? And then they go into childhood, and they get into childhood, and they start getting, that they're beginning to get hungry because they start to get a little cranky, don't they? And they just start getting cranky, and you can tell that they just maybe need a little snack. As they grow up, they can start talking, and they ask for a snack. Maybe they've grown a little bit older, and even then they don't even ask for a snack anymore. They just go to the cabinet and grab something to eat, and it's just simply because either they're hungry, or secondly, it could be because they are what? Starts with a B. They're bored, right? Either one of the two, right? And so they've got to do something. They don't like being hungry, and so they seek to satisfy their hunger. And you know what? If I were to take a poll real quick, I bet you none of us in here really likes to be hungry. Raise your hand if you enjoy hunger. Go ahead, raise your hand. Wow. A couple of people enjoy hunger. You are in the vast minority, my friends. Vast minority. All right. Hunger tends to be slightly uncomfortable, a little bit. Now here's a little science for you. You may have already known this, maybe not. Infants are born with about 9,000 taste buds. Did you know that? 9,000 taste buds. And those taste buds are made up of sensory cells that continuously are regenerating themselves every couple of weeks. But the older that we grow, and the more that we damage our taste buds, like you sip coffee that's too hot, or take a sip of soup, a slurp of soup that may be too hot or something like that, and you're damaging your taste buds, the less likely your taste buds will be able to regenerate themselves. So the older you get, the less your taste buds are regenerating, which is why foods begin to taste less potent, which is why babies, they may like something or dislike something at a very young age, but the older that they grow, the more they tend to like those things, because those taste buds are changing continuously. Same is true about smell. The older that our olfactory nerves grow, which also regenerate themselves, the older that they get, the more damaged that they can become, and less likely that they will regenerate all the way through. So the older that we get, the less that we smell. And of course, taste is about 90% smell. And so if you can't smell very well, then I think it's called nausea. I think that's what it's called. Anosema, something like that. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. The less that we are able to smell, the less that things begin to taste. And so that's why oftentimes older people, because they have fewer taste buds and they have fewer olfactory sensors, that they can taste things. Things just don't taste right anymore. They don't taste at all. And oftentimes what happens in that when that occurs is really that the older we get, the less we actually want to eat. Because one of the things about eating is that it tastes amazing, right? That's why we like to eat. That's why I like to eat, because it tastes amazing. People are like, why don't you savor your food? Because it tastes really good. And I want to eat more of it. And the faster that I eat, the more food I can get into my mouth and re-experience that whole sense of taste all over again, right? That's why I do it, right? In our passage this morning, we're continuing on with those Beatitudes. We're continuing on even with the woes that Jesus was talking about. And here Jesus is talking about blessed are the hungry, and he is giving a promise to those who are hungry, and then he goes into the woe below, and he woes those who are full. He's contrasting his teachings. And my hope is that as we open up the Word, that we consider what it is that we are craving, and then consider what it is that will satisfy us. So once again, we're given two choices. We talked about it last week. We were given two options. Today we're given two choices on how we live our lives. First choice is live famished. Second choice is live full. And then as we close, I just want to quickly go over again a couple of biblical examples of those who lived famished or full. So if you will, please stand with me for the honor of the reading of God's Word. We're going to read just the very beginning of verse 21 and the very beginning of verse 25. Pastor Matt's going to preach on the second part of those two verses next week. So here we are. Chapter 6, verse 21. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. And let's jump down to verse 25. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Thank you. Be seated. So that first option that we're presented with is the option to live famished. Now, I am going to admit again, I've kind of already done it, but I'm just going to, if there is any wonder, I don't like feeling full. I mean, I don't like feeling hungry. I love feeling full. I do not like feeling hungry, right? This text right here, blessed are the hungry now, that is so not me. I just don't like it. I don't like having hunger pangs, right? But when Jesus is talking about here, he's not talking about, just to make sure that we understand, when he is talking here, he is not talking about like just the slight hunger that we get, maybe like, snack time kind of hunger, right? Where we've gone through, we've had breakfast, and then it's not quite lunchtime, but we're kind of beginning to feel a little bit hungry, and we just need a little snack to tie us over, so we just go and grab a donut, or if you're one of those healthy people, right, a banana or an apple or something like that, right? But you that's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about hunger. He's talking about hunger pangs. That's not me. I don't like that. I don't even like getting to snack time. Which is why I like to drink a lot, not... You know what I mean, right? Jesus is talking about the hunger that hurts. That's why I say it's really that we live famished. And that's not me. When I was a kid, I used to drink milk. I know that's kind of probably surprising. I drank milk like it was going out of style. I could drink an entire gallon of milk in a day by myself. I loved milk. Then somebody told me, I know this isn't true, right? But it was just enough, right? Somebody told me that cows sweat through their milk. I was like, that's it. I'm not doing it. No more. And I went to from milk, and I went to sodas. Growing up in Georgia, because Coca-Cola, right? I drank Coca-Cola like it was going out of style. Or Yoo-Hoos. You guys remember Yoo-Hoos? They used to be in glass bottles, not those stupid little, I don't know what they are now, cardboard things. Taste much better in glass bottles, right? So I would drink Yoo-Hoos. My parents actually got on to me because I was drinking them out of house and home, drinking Yoo-Hoos, right? That's what I was doing. And then as I grew up, then I stopped doing that kind of thing. It was more like coffee. And I drink my fill of coffee, about probably a pot of coffee at least a day. Katie joins me with that. She's got a whole t-shirt that says most likely to drink all the coffee, right, for Christmas, right? That's her thing, my thing, right, or water. And I drink because I don't like feeling hungry. I don't want to eat so much. I want to drink so I don't feel like I'm lacking food. I don't know what it's like, though, to never have missed a meal because there is not a meal available. Never been there. Probably most of us, many of us, have never been there. Some of us may have. It's been a long time maybe since that's happened. But I'm not one that's ever experienced that. So it sounds strange to me when we pray something like, give us this day our daily bread, as if it's not already provided for. Not only is a day provided for of daily bread, but we've got a week, maybe even a month. When I was a kid, again, my mom would go to the commissary, the army base. She'd go to the commissary, and she would go and get carts and carts of food so that we would have enough food for at least a month. Because the commissary was much cheaper than the grocery store, but it was a lot further away. So she would just go and pick up everything that we needed for a month. And we had an entire room down in our basement filled with food that we could just go down there and grab. Again, last week we were talking about, we open up our refrigerators, there's food all in there. Pantries, food everywhere. So we don't really necessarily know what it is like to really be without so much, at least not anytime soon. The idea of not having a meal or going days without a meal is foreign. But the promise here is to those who are hungry, to those who are famished. And the promise is that they will be blessed. And remember, that word blessed is not just simply happy. That word blessed is a beatific feeling. It is a deep excitement. It's a deep joy that we have because of what Christ is going to do or what God is going to do. So here he is saying, if you are hungry, then you are also deeply joyous and excited. Why? Because the promise is that you shall be satisfied. And here is the general point that we need to learn. Last week we were talking about this with the rich. I'm sorry, with the poor, right? That he gives a promise to the poor, those who are poor and feel, and this week are feeling hungry, and that he's giving these blessings out. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at other blessings as well. Those blessed feelings are not because of the predicament that we are in, but because of the promise that we are given. That is huge for us to understand. Let me say it again, right? The blessing, that deep-seated joy and excitement is not because of the predicament, it is because of the promise that Jesus is giving to us. And we see this throughout Scripture. This is not just Jesus doing this. We find this in James. If you go to James 1 and 2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith, here's the promise, produces steadfastness. The joy that is coming, the excitement that is coming, the reason that we can rejoice is because there is a promise of steadfastness that comes with it. Or Peter. Peter says in 1 Peter 1:6, he says, in this you rejoice. Though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials. In this, not in the trials, not in those various trials, right? But in this, the promise of God to guard you through faith unto salvation, that's the context here. That promise ought to bring deep-seated joy and excitement into your life. Sure, right now, you may be grieving because of the trials. But deeper than the grief is the joy and excitement, that beatific blessing that comes. Or even the writer of Hebrews. He wrote this, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So here is Jesus. Even Jesus, he has to endure the cross. He despises the shame, but he sees it and he has joy that is set before him, the promise of the throne of God. There is a place, though, that Paul tells us, and it's in Ephesians, where he says that we are to give thanks, not just in everything, that's in 1 Thessalonians, but he says give thanks for everything. It really annoys me when I hear people say, well, he only says give thanks in everything, in everything, but not for everything. I was like, well, yeah, actually he does. In Ephesians, he says giving thanks for everything. But why? Well, even in that, it's not simply just because there is trial that comes or there are hardships that come, but the promise actually goes all the way back to verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1. Where he is saying, be imitators of God as beloved children, and all these things, that all those paragraphs afterwards, all about becoming more like imitators of God as beloved children. It's the promise. That's why we can give thanks. So here is Jesus saying that those who are hungry, you who are hungry, experience a deep joy and excitement because you will be satisfied. That's the promise. You will be satisfied. You will be satisfied. Jesus is not simply just predicting the future, he is actually making a promise. We do this all the time, don't we? If you ever had a child that has been acting up in the grocery store or maybe in church, right? And when you get in the car, you look at them and you tell them, you and I, we will be having a talk when we get home, right? You're not just predicting the future, right? You are making them a promise, right? You will be having a talk, right? That happens. We're not predicting the future, making a promise. In this case, though, Jesus' promise Jesus' promise here is that the hungry will be satisfied. And even though I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. Right? This is an occasion of divine passive. If you're one of those kind of study types, kind of people that you like to learn some specifics here, this is what we call divine passive. Divine passive is because the writer doesn't want to use God's name wrongly, and so rather than putting God's name in there, he puts a passive, but there is no a passive tense, but there is no there's no object there. There's no one there that is actually doing the action. So we are receiving the action, but who in the world's doing the action? It's called the divine passive. We are understanding of the fact that Jesus is saying here that God is going to be the one who satisfies us. No one else can do it, only God. And it's interesting here that Jesus uses the word that he uses, the word satisfied. Even in English, if we look back at verse 21 and then look at 25, we will see that he says, you will be satisfied. But then when we get into verse 25, he says, you who are full now. In the Greek, those are two different words. In the English, we even have it as two different words, though they can basically kind of be used somewhat interchangeably. It's just interesting that he uses it here, that he doesn't use the same. He uses some synonyms. And I really haven't found actually one single commentary that actually has even brought this point up. So I don't want to make too much of it, but I do think that it's interesting. Because as I was studying this word, as I was looking a little bit deeper into this word, and really what this word is used for and how it's been used in history and even in the first century, what I found was that the word satisfied, that we have, that first one in verse 21, that word satisfied, typically, not always, but typically, almost always, is used for things that are not related to food and drink. But the word full that we have in verse 25 is almost always, though not every single time, but almost always used for food and drink. So it's almost as if Jesus is talking, he begins to talk about the physical. Blessed are you who are hungry, but then he's transitioning into the spiritual. You will be satisfied. God shall satisfy you. After all, we are psychosomatic beings. We have soul and we have flesh. And Jesus seems to be bridging these gaps here between the longings of our stomachs and the longings of our souls. So that in one word, we have both. You will be satisfied. Blaise Pascal wrote this a long time ago. He says, what else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim? But there was once in man a true happiness, in which all that now remains is the empty print and trace. This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are. Though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. So let me ask you, what is it really that you're hungry for? What are you famished for? It certainly could be righteousness, like Matthew had recorded on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It could be that. But it could be different. It could be you're hungry for companionship, for family, for friends. Maybe you're hungry for purpose, to make a difference, to be wanted. Are you hungry for God? Because the promise of satisfaction is made. We need only be patient for the Lord to present it. Which leads us to that second option. First is to live famished. Second is to live full. There are those of us who are just really, honestly, if we were just to be honest, we're just a little bit too impatient. We cannot wait for God to satisfy us, so we seek to fill ourselves up with whatever we can find, kind of like what Blaise Pascal was saying. And Jesus says that this is a woeful state to be in. We saw last week that the word woe simply means a deep sorrow. So it's the opposite, right? So if blessing, right, that beatific feeling, if that's blessing, a deep blessing, a deep happiness, a deep joy, a deep excitement, then woe being the exact opposite is a deep sorrow. It's something that we are to pity. It's a deep sadness here. And so those who are full now, Jesus says, well, they ought to be pitied. People will, if you have ever been hungry and you see somebody eating, you don't probably pity them, you almost envy them. But Jesus says, no. Woe to them. Feel pity for them because they are going to be hungry. Again, this is different language than we saw in the blessing. Whereas Jesus said the cause of blessedness is the satisfaction that they are going to receive, which is the future passive, divine passive, indicative, meaning it will happen and God will do it, right? Jesus says here, you will be hungry. This is the future active, indicative. In other words, God isn't the one that's going to make us hungry. It's not that we have filled ourselves up and then God's like, oh, bzz. Now you're going to feel hunger. It's not that. It's the fact that we are filling ourselves up, and the natural state, the process of being full is that we will eventually be hungry again. This hunger is coming straight out of ourselves. This hunger flows naturally from the state of being full. Anybody celebrate Christmas yesterday besides my family? Our family did. Okay. Did you have dinner last night or sometime yesterday? Okay. All right. Anybody gorge themselves with the food that they had for dinner yesterday? Did anybody do that at all? Okay. All right. Yeah. Right. Did anybody have to later go back for seconds or make a sandwich or anything like that? Did that happen after you gorged yourself? Yeah. You know why? Because the natural state of being full is that the process is that you will once again, what? Be hungry. That's true for the body, and that is true for the soul. It's the natural progression of things. Just because we are hungry doesn't mean that we'll soon be full, though. It's not the same with the opposite. Just because we are hungry does not mean that we will eventually get full. Not in the natural process of things. Supernatural, sure, but not necessarily in the natural. I can be hungry, and I can go days. People have actually, of course, died from starvation. Because the natural state is not the opposite. Get full, you will be hungry. You get hungry, there's no guarantee that you will be full. And Jesus said that it is actually a sadder state to be in, to be full, because eventually you will get hungry. And it will eventually lead to a hunger that cannot be filled. And if you're like me again, you're constantly filling yourself because you don't like your stomach to be empty, nor do we like our souls to be empty. So my guess is that maybe not physically, but certainly spiritually, we are continuously seeking to fill up our souls with anything and everything that we can. Rather than allowing the hunger to continue until God chooses to fill it, we impatiently fill it ourselves. Like the woman at the well, some of us may hunger for companionship, and rather than waiting for God to move, we go from relationship to relationship, leaving more hungry than we were before. Some may hunger for purpose, and rather than waiting for God to fill it, we seek to find purpose in our work, or in our families, or in our communities, or even in our church. And soon, we realize that what we are doing still feels purposeless. We hunger for truth. And so we begin to read up on philosophy, maybe even take some philosophy classes, read up and study some religions. And we still become empty. It's kind of like eating potato chips. Who wants a potato chip? Anybody want a potato chip? Zoe wants a potato chip. Come on, Zoe. Come down, get yourself a potato chip. Now, I know that this is not just Christmas season, but it is also cold and flu season. So after washing my hands, I put on some gloves. I made little individual baggies. There you are. Anybody else? Anybody else want a chip? All right, come on. Come get a chip. There you go. Yeah. There you go. You want a chip? Anybody else? You want one too. All right. Here we go. Oh, you want one? There you go. Anybody else? I got 2 left, 3 left. I got 3 left. All right. I got. Yeah, sir. Now, potato chips are interesting. Potato chips are interesting because, you got to eat a lot of them. I got a whole bag. Lay's used to have the slogan. Anybody remember? But you can't eat just one. Pringles had one similar. Once you pop, can't stop, right? Potato chips are interesting. And the reason that we crave them, the reason that we can't stop at just one, all the kids are like, everybody has like, I want another one. Gotta have another one. The reason that we can't stop is two ingredients that's within the potato chip that makes us so that we have a hard time stopping with just one potato chip. First one is salt. The salt gets on the tongue, and the tongue suddenly wants more, right? It's like, oh, that was good. Give me more, right? And you would think at some point the stomach would go, no, I'm full. I don't want any more, right? But the stomach doesn't do that. Why doesn't the stomach do that? It's because of the second ingredient, grease. Grease fools the stomach into thinking that it's not yet full, which is why you can eat an entire bag of potato chips in one sitting, and you've eaten like 500, 600, 700, 800 calories, and you don't feel full yet. Because all of a sudden those 2 ingredients start working and tricking you into thinking that everything is fine. And that's really not the case. Right? Our bodies, and what we have done is we have tricked our bodies, and we have basically even taught our bodies to find satisfaction in junk rather than healthful foods. And our bodies are starving for nutrients, but craving nuggets, right? And so often our souls are filled with junk. Starving for sustenance, but instead being fed sophistry, reasoning, and philosophy that sounds really good at first, but that really mean nothing. It's shallow. And Paul told the Colossians, he says to them, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So others of us, though we are more like our post-Christmas dinner selves, where we've gorged ourselves on God, and we've just simply had enough. Some of us are doing the junk food, and some of us have gorged ourselves on God, and we've had enough. We've been going to church since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, right? We've heard all the Bible stories in Sunday school. We heard them again on Sunday morning during worship service, during the sermon. Right? We've sung all the songs, all the same songs for the last 20, 30, 50, 60 years. We know it all. We've heard it all. VBS, we invented VBS, right? We've heard it all. We've gorged ourselves on God. We've got the theology. We've got the words. We've got the concepts. What else is there left to learn? Right? Would you like some more pie? Oh, no thanks, I'm full. Would you like some more, God? No, thank you. I'm satisfied. I'm good there. And most of us would never say such a thing. But we are living full lives. It's not full because you're constantly feasting on His Word or prayer or communion. You're full because you are living on that previous feast. It's like that elderly man or woman who is wasting away because they've lost their sense of taste and smell for food, and all they can remember is what it used to be. There's no longer a taste for God. The Lord no longer smells sweet to our souls. His Word is no longer savory, and so you are no longer hungry. I'm sorry, you are hungry. You just don't know it. And that, brothers and sisters, that's a sad state of affairs. So we go back to the Lord's Prayer. We ask for our daily bread, and how that really just doesn't even compute so much with us. It's just something that we say. But if we were to stop and think about it, in reality, our bodies need the daily bread. We may have cupboards filled and pantries full and refrigerators stocked to the brim. But if we're not eating of it, we will go hungry. And we will starve ourselves to death. Our bodies cannot live long on the previous meal. And the same is true with our souls. I think it was Alistair not Alistair McBegg, though he is, Scottish. Alistair Begg. There's no Mick in there. But I do believe it was Alistair Begg who I heard say something to the effect of, for pastors, as an encouragement to pastors, he says, it's not every sermon is going to be a feast for your people. It's not going to be your best. He says, but if you are feeding them daily their dinner, it may be a simple dinner, but if you are feeding them the Word, then they will continue to grow and be healthy. That's true. It is true. We cannot live long on the previous meal of God's Word. We must continue to be in it. We cannot live long on the previous meal of prayer, but we must continue. We cannot live long on the previous communion, but we must continue to consume those things. Because we cannot survive. We will starve. Have you ever seen a person in the midst of anorexia and how they are just skin and bones? Or maybe you've seen a person or seen one of the shows where someone is too heavy to literally get out of bed. Or maybe you've experienced it yourself, or maybe you've somebody in your family that is just too busy to sit down and enjoy a meal and are constantly on the go. It doesn't really matter which one of those you've experienced or seen. They all come to the same destination. And that is that they will become, or are already, extremely unhealthy. And that is why we pity them. You see someone with anorexia. You see someone that's too busy. You see someone that's too heavy. And it hurts you. And if that's the case of the body, what then do we say about the soul? So I quickly want to give two examples in the Bible of each of a person who was one who was hungry and one who was full. And the first one is King David. King David was hungry for God. He had a hunger there. This doesn't mean that he was perfect. It doesn't mean that he was 100% right in everything they did. Obviously, he wasn't right. It just means that he was hungry. Listen to his words in Psalm 63, 1 and 2. He says, "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory." And then jump down to verse 5 and 6. My soul will be satisfied. Same word as full that we saw in verse 25. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. Notice, when is his soul satisfied? It's not really from the previous meal. He is remembering, yes, but it's not really from the previous meal, but he is meditating, his present meditation in the watches of the night. Second example, King Asa. Author of Chronicles says this. He says, "And Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God." And if you go to 2 Chronicles and you read chapters 14 and 15, you see Asa is doing an amazing job at reforming Israel or reforming Judah and bringing them back to the Lord. He is doing everything that seems to be right. But in chapter 16, something happens. We're not exactly told what happens, but something happens. He stopped craving the Lord. He instead started craving the help of the king of Aram. And when he was confronted by a prophet of God, rather than be like King David, who heard the words and repented of his sin, King Asa threw him in jail, threw him in prison, didn't want to hear it. And then we read in 2 Chronicles 16:12, he says, "In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but sought the help from physicians." So here's the king of Judah, who initially had hungered after the Lord. But as he grew older, in his fullness, he ceased to be hungry for him anymore. He had gorged himself. I mean, you go back and you read 2 full chapters of all that he had done. He had gorged himself on the Lord. When he was full, he just decided he had had enough, and he would rather have foreign help and local physicians. And that's a sad, woeful state. So as we finish this beatitude and this woe, so let's remember last week that this is to the disciples. Jesus looked at his disciples and said, this is to them. These words are personal. Blessed are you, and woe are you, or woe to you. So we have to ask ourselves, you know the question's coming. Have to ask ourselves, which state do we live in? Blessedness or woefulness? Are you hungry and therefore blessed with joy and excitement because God is going to fill you? There is a promise of God filling you. Or are you full because you cannot be patient enough for God to do his work? Would you rather go hungry today and feast on what God has prepared, or would you forego the feast so that your belly doesn't grumble today? Jesus used the word now in both of those. Blessed are you who hunger now, woe to you who are full now. And I think that's because we need to constantly be asking this question. Every moment that is now, we need to ask, when we wake up, which one am I? When we are tempted to satisfy our own hunger, which one am I? When we see others being filled by God's promise before we get to be filled by God's promise, which one are we? When we go to bed, still hungry Which one are we? Whatever that now may be. And understand also that there is no guarantee that the promise will be fulfilled in this lifetime. We have to accept that. God may take us all the way through life without fulfilling that hunger. But that doesn't mean that we are okay, that we've been given the okay to go and satisfy ourselves. No, he's still calling us to be faithful, to hang on to the promise, because the promise will be fulfilled. Like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they were promised the land. And they didn't get it. They had to look at the bigger picture, which is what we see in Hebrews chapter 11. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. That's the faith that we must continue in, knowing that God will still fulfill his promise. So may we in faith hunger for the substance of heaven rather than be satisfied with the shadows on earth. Because here's the truth. Here's the truth. Every single one of us will be hungry. And every single one of us will be full. It's not a matter of if, it is simply a matter of when. Will you be hungry now to be satisfied later? Or will you fill yourself now and be hungry later? Let's pray.